excited about preaching about some of the stuff that we're entering into about Christian financial principles. For those of you who are younger, I hope that you will really begin to honestly try to get it, because it'll save you a lot of grief and will bring a lot of blessings over life. For each of us, wherever we are in our state of life, there are principles that, if we're honest with ourselves, once we begin to know them, we can look back and say, okay, I screwed up there, I screwed up there, I screwed up there, and hence here's where I am, and here's why I am here. Now how do I get out of where I am from here to where I ought to be? Now, folks, I have zero intention. Well, this morning I'm preaching to myself, so I hope that you will be able to get something from it too. But we just sang a song, Lord, you are more precious than silver. There are probably a whole lot of folks in the room this morning that have never actually seen real live silver. Lord, you are more costly than gold. Well, what that is talking about is the whole financial realm of life. Amen. And we are singing the song, Lord, you're more important to me than money. That's what we're singing. Well, do we believe that? Do we practice that? Now look, folks, we've all been raised how we've been raised. We've all been raised where we've been raised. And we all live where we live. And so the culture around us has shaped us stunningly. Some of that has probably been good. Some of that has been devastating. Well, how can we learn those biblical principles that will most contribute to our well-being, most contribute to the well-being of others, most put us into a position where we can be blessed of God, as opposed to continually digging ourselves out of a hole? And that's kind of the purpose in large measure for what I'm wanting to share. This whole issue of Christian financial principles, man, oh man, oh man, oh man, it is a great and wonderful mine of nuggets and truth. I'm not going to even begin to proclaim that I've got it all handled or that I understand it all, but man, I tell you, the more I dig, the more I realize how much of our lives are tied up in that. Okay, so here's some foundational things. I personally believe that the Bible is for all men of all ages, no matter where you're raised, no matter where you live. Every person's circumstances are different, but the principles by which we are to live are universal. Now, there are some things that the Bible teaches us, particularly in the Old Testament, that there's no possible way we could follow. Okay, for example, well, you've heard, the kind of little song as kids or whatever, that every promise in the book is mine, every verse, every scripture, every line, whatever it is, as though somehow everything that the Bible says to anybody is for me, and I can personally appropriate that. Well, there are some real problems with that. I don't think that that is a true thing. For example, there is no way in the world that people today, anywhere in the world, doesn't matter where you are, whether you're Jew, Greek, Hindu, whatever, there's no way you can bring all the tithes to the tabernacle. Can't happen. Now, that happened during the Exodus, but the tabernacle's long gone, replaced by a temple. There's no way you can bring all the tithes to the temple. The temple is gone. It was gone in 70 AD. It hasn't been here for, 2,000 years. The principles, I believe, are still there, and they still apply. Now, how do they apply, and what does that mean for me? Well, that's a part of the process of coming to rightly understand, rightly divide the word of truth. And so, anyway, the principles that God has given us are universal. They work for us. Last week, we looked at 7 financial principles primarily found in Matthew chapter 6, 19. You have that reference, and Luke chapter 16. You can go home and read them if you were not able to be here last week or whatever. But these principles work whatever you believe about stuff. They're like the laws of nature. You know, you can believe you can fly, and you can have every confidence that you can fly, but I'm telling you, if you step off of the edge of the Grand Canyon, you can flap your wings, you can say, I don't believe I'm falling, you can believe whatever you want to do, you can make whatever positive confession you want to make until you hit the ground. You know, I mean, there are laws that God has created into the universe, and they work whatever you believe about them, okay? You plant corn, you don't get apples, that kind of stuff, all right? Now, there are financial principles that also apply in every area of our life, too. So we're going to just quickly go over them, and from last week, just as a recap. First of all, number one, treasures on earth are both temporary and uncertain. Everything we have decays, including us. You know, I mean, everything we have falls apart. Eventually, we can fix it and fix it and fix it and fix it, but ultimately, you know, it's a goner. So treasures on earth are both temporary and uncertain. Number two, where our treasure is, there will our heart be. There our heart is. Now here's the question. So genuinely, where is your heart? Is your heart really and truly, and you're the only one that knows, other than God, God knows, you and God know, is your heart in the things of the kingdom of God, or is your heart only in things on earth? That's a question only you can answer, but the scripture is still true. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be. The third thing is, we're to use our worldly wealth, whatever that is, to make friends here and hereafter. Now we cannot bribe God. So if you think, you know, I've heard preachers one after another throughout my whole life, you know, send me $100 and God is obligated, glory to God, to send you 1,000, you know, that kind of stuff. Okay, folks, you don't bribe God. However, we are able to invest in the kingdom of heaven, and that bears fruit forever. So that's an understanding of how God works. Number four, whoever is faithful in a little will be given more, or can give much, and can be entrusted with much more. Now, this has sweeping ramifications in whether we do a little job well, you know, whether we cheat in the little stuff. If we're not faithful with the little, we won't be faithful with much, Jesus said. And if we're not faithful with wealth, we can't be trusted with true riches, which is number 6. Well, number 5. If we handle our worldly material benefits well, we can be trusted with true riches. I've known, and you've known too if you stop and think about it. I have known people who maybe have actually gone to church their whole lives and just never, ever get it. They never comprehend. They never understand. They never really get a grip on stuff. And one of the primary reasons for that is that they never learn to be faithful with what God trusted to them materially. And if you can't be trusted with what you can see, you're not going to be able to be genuinely trusted with what you can't see. If you're not faithful with riches that decay, how are you ever going to be given the riches that last? Number 6. If we care for what belongs to others, like we ought to, we can be given our own. How do we treat that which belongs to other people, whether it's our boss, whether it's our neighbor, whatever? That's a crucial step. And how do we treat that which belongs to God? Number 7, nobody can serve two masters. I mean, and Jesus makes it very specific. He said, you cannot serve God and money. Doesn't mean you can't have God and be faithful to God and be trusted with money, but you can't have both be Lord. So who's driving the train, honestly? Who's driving the train in our lives? That's just a live question. Okay, so today I want to look at another passage. No extra charge for that. That's for last week's message. I'd like to look at another passage that has a lot of different parallels, but it has some other principles that I think are huge and significant. They're principles of life, but they also touch upon principles of finance. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, starting verse 17, let me just read this passage for you through verse 24. Now this passage, first of all, starts talking about marriage and divorce and whether living single or living, married or whatever like that. So that's kind of a part of the first chapter, part of the chapter 7. But he gets down to this verse, starting verse 17. It says, nevertheless, each one should retain the place in life that the Lord assigned him and to which God has called him. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. Was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. Was a man uncircumcised when he is called? He should not attempt to be circumcised. I don't know how you would even do that. But, if you were born a Jew, don't just try to become a Gentile. If you're a Gentile, don't try to become a Jew, with this outer thing. Circumcision is nothing. Uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's commands is what counts. Each one should remain in the situation he was called in when God called him. He was in when God called him. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you. Although if you can gain your freedom, do so. For he who was a slave when he was called to the Lord, called by the Lord, is the Lord's freedman. Similarly, he who was a free man when he was called is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brothers, each man, as responsible to God, should remain in the situation God called him to. Well, okay, so we live in the United States of America in 2019. Most of us here could go anywhere in the world we wanted to go if we made up our minds to do it. Now, we all have some limitations, and some have greater limitations than others. I'd like to be able to travel the world, every few weeks or whatever. I wouldn't enjoy doing that. I have some limitations. I just, well, there's some number of limitations. But on the other hand, we have some stunning, amazing, remarkable freedoms and prosperity like most people that have ever lived in the world or that live in the world today cannot even imagine. We just took a trip out to Portland, 600 miles. We were able just to drive out there and drive back and, had a little accident on the way back, all that stuff. But we didn't have to go through a checkpoint. Where in the world can that kind of stuff happen? Not a lot of places. Okay, but with freedoms come amazing opportunities. We don't need to do what our parents did just because they did. Well, we don't need to do what the king says. We don't need to do what the government forces us to do. We don't have slave masters keeping us in servitude. We don't have a caste system where if you're born in this, that's where you have to stay the rest of your life. Now, believers in Jesus can live in all those environments, and the Bible tells us how to live in those environments. But the environment that we live in is one of amazing freedom and liberty. So what does this passage mean to us? Well, are you a slave when you come to Christ? See, to us that seems really foreign. In many parts of the world to this very day, that is a live question. If you're a slave and you come to Jesus, what are you supposed to do? Well, the Bible tells us. If you happen to be a slave and you come to Jesus, then you be the absolutely best slave there ever was. Now, if you can gain your freedom, good, gain your freedom. But how it is how it is. Do what bloom where you're planted, Now, life is temporary. Multiple biblical examples abound about slaves, biblical examples to say nothing of, the world, but about slaves that taught their masters. Remember the little slave girl of Naaman the Syrian? She was taken captive when the Syrians came over and took over the Israelites, whatever. Naaman had leprosy, and the little slave girl said, well, oh boy, I wish you were only in Israel, because if you were in Israel, there's a prophet over there and you could be healed. Well, we see that story given in the Bible, and Naaman sure enough went down there, and lo and behold, got healed. Very fascinating story. We see Epaphroditus in the New Testament and whatever. Now, here's the thing that I want to give us a caution. Some people use this scripture and some others to defend slavery as though it's biblical. Other people use these same passages to destroy the Bible, saying, aha, see, it talks about slavery. The way that I believe we need to look at that is this. The Bible just tells life how it is. And in our world today, there is slavery. And there has been slavery probably from the beginning of time, beginning shortly after the fall in the garden. Whenever one person or people began to take over another, slavery has been there. It's happening in our world today. We don't defend slavery on the basis of the scripture, or you're just not rightly dividing the word of truth. And the same is true with nullifying scripture, because it deals with slavery. It's just that it deals with life as it really is, not as we wish it was. So Paul writes again in Colossians, and let me read just this little passage. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to win their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Now, there are several key principles found in these passages. Hopefully, you'll be able to get something from them. The first one is this: bloom where you're planted. Wherever you are, look, we cannot be where we wish we were. We are where we are. And right where we are is where we are planted. We should see our lives as a calling. The scripture mentions that very clearly. I just read it to you. You know, where were you when Christ called you? Where were you when you recognized you're a sinner and you need to be forgiven? Where were you when you begin well, go from there. Start there and recognize where you are. Now, you know, we're not here by accident. God knows and God cares. Every person in the world is offered pardon, forgiveness, grace, and abundant life, and eternal life. But that may look radically different for a Christian in Egypt, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, fill in the blank, than it does right here in the United States of America in 2019. But wherever we are is where we need to apply the gospel to our situation, and bloom where we are planted is the principle, first of all. We can only come to Jesus from where we are, not where we would like to be. You know, as has been said, you go to war with the army you have, not the one you wish you had. But the beauty of the gospel is that Jesus receives us from where we are. So what is your situation? Are you married? Divorced? Widowed? Single? Jew? Greek? Male? Female? Slave? Free? American? Afghani? Whoever we are, that's who we are. Jesus accepts us there and says, now follow me. From wherever you are. Man, if you're young, if you're old, whatever our situation, God knows that. And He wants us to follow Him from where we are. Okay, so the second principle, and it touches on this first one, we must learn to be content. Now, folks, that is huge. I mean, man, this is one of those massive principles of life that we need to be able to figure out, because our whole lives otherwise are spent in discontent. Don't let, were you a slave? Don't let it trouble you. Man, you know, Philippians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul's writing, he says this, and listen, and this is a familiar passage to you, but man, it's huge. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. Folks, many of you may be able to recite that, but this is a profoundly powerful biblical financial principle. Life experiences, especially bad ones, can help us learn to be content. You know, we've seen worse. Okay, you know, many young people complain about the first job they ever had. Right? I mean, you know, they get a job and boy, life stinks. I got to get up at 9 o'clock in the morning. I got to get in there. I got to spend 4 hours sweeping the floor. And my boss is an idiot. And how, you know, right? I mean, life is really tough, you know, in that application. Now listen, none of you have had it the way as tough as I have. My first job, I was in Kodiak, Alaska, and I worked at a grocery store for a lady that actually probably really was mentally ill. Everything in Kodiak, Alaska comes in from the ship. And I was also a longshoreman, so I don't give me any guff. But that was a separate job, which paid a lot better. But I was working for Mrs. Banks in the grocery store, and everything in the world came into that grocery store in boxes. And there were boxes everywhere, and she wanted me to go into a room full of boxes and put them all into one box. She wanted those babies nested. I nest boxes to this day. But I mean, she would come and get on my case. I mean, she was, like I say, she probably was plumb nuts. But in any event, boy, she wanted those boxes to go away, and we didn't throw them out and burn them. We nested them. One inside another, and she wanted that whole room to go away and be in essentially one box if she could get that done. So, you know, but an interesting thing has happened along the way. I've faced some other things that were tough. I can almost look back on the first job. Man, that was wonderful. If only I could go back to the first job I had. No, I don't want to go back to that one. But, you know, how many of us see life is relative, and as young people we think, oh man, this really stinks. Well, when you've been through stuff that really does stink, you can look back and you can say, that wasn't so bad. We have things to compare it to. You with me? Okay? Life experiences, especially the bad ones, can teach us to be content if we will listen and learn to be content. Being content would fix many of our problems, whether they're financial or otherwise. You know, we wouldn't need to covet so much. We wouldn't be driven by keeping up with our friends or keeping up with our neighbors or keeping up with our relatives. You know, how many folks are driven that they've got to have a little more because their brother-in-law or somebody has something, and so because they have something, it drives our discontent. You know, advertisers thrive. The whole shtick of advertisers is to make us discontented with whatever we have. We don't have the right toothbrush, we don't have the right toothpaste, we don't have the right car, we don't have the right whatever it is, the right figure, you know, to make us discontent. Much debt is driven, and therefore a lot of other problems spring from not learning to be content. Now look, how things are is how they are. We need to learn to deal with it and be content. Now the next step, see on your outline there under Roman number 2, learning to be content does not mean that we must be or even should be complacent. That's a whole different kettle of fish. But with greater freedom come greater opportunities and greater responsibilities. Now that's a great incentive to some, and it is a great threat to others. Have you ever heard a kid say, "Boy, when I'm an adult, I'll be able to do anything I want to"? Now those of us that are adults go, "Oh, for the good old days when we were a kid, all we had to do was get up, play, somebody fixes lunch, breakfast, whatever it is, that, oh, for the good old days of being a child," right? Or have you ever known or heard of prisoners that get so acclimatized to not having to make any decisions, they get out on the street, man, they want to get back in. Because it's unpleasant to have freedom and have to make all these decisions. Better when somebody told me when to get up, fold your bed, go to the day room, go out, whatever. Scriptures teaches us that a slave that wants to remain a slave, there was a process for that in the Old Testament. Because for some, being a slave, not in the way we view slavery typically, and that is the abuse and being sold and all that kind of stuff. There's a different kind of slavery. But if you want to be a slave, that is sometimes easier than having to be out on your own. See, some have no interest in advancing themselves, but like a life of low responsibility. Some people don't want to advance to the role of management. Yeah, you have some greater liberties, you have some greater freedoms as a manager, but on the other hand, you have a lot greater responsibility. And boy, if you can just do your job, go home, kick up, watch TV, do whatever you want to do, there are a lot of people who find that happiness, they can just relax, they don't have to worry about it. There are other people who say, man, I want to make a difference, and I want to grow, and I want to learn, and I want to climb the ladder, whatever it is. Either of those can be fine as long as Jesus Christ is Lord, and we're not being driven by other stuff. Trust God for where we are, but it's fine to have other legitimate interests to want to improve yourself. Being content does not mean that we can be or should be or ought to be complacent. Now, Roman number 3. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Now think with me a second. People around the world today are forced into slavery. Forced slavery, there's nothing we can do about it. If you're forced into slavery, you're forced into slavery. And do not think for one moment that because we live in the United States of America, that could not happen. We see illustrations every day of the world on the news where people, oftentimes children or women, particularly the vulnerable, are forced into slavery, whether for the sex traffic or for something else. We see it's happening every day around us. I've been to several seminars on that lately in the law enforcement realm. This happens in our world, it happens in our community where people are forced into slavery. But if you are genuinely forced into slavery, if our country gets taken over by somebody else, which could happen in a variety of ways, there may be nothing you can do about that. But may God grant that not happen to us. But kidnapping happens, sex trafficking happens, wars happen, one people group take over another, and that kind of slavery can be terrible, man. Oh, man. But we're not to willingly become slaves of man. Now, in our country, debt is the likeliest form of voluntary servitude. Man, I hope you'll hear me here and try to grasp the truth of this. Proverbs 22:7 says this: The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. The New American Standard Version says it this way: the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. Voluntary debt is voluntary servitude, but it can easily transform into involuntary servitude. We see several biblical examples of this actually being true and actually being the norm at the time. Now, capture, there's these biblical principles. In 2 Kings chapter 4, we see this in the life of Elisha. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that he revered the Lord, but now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves." Now here was this guy, one of the school of the prophets, somehow had incurred debt, whether properly, improperly, justly, unjustly, we don't know, but apparently was able to keep things afloat. He died. All of a sudden, his wife, his widow now, has this debt, and there's no way to pay it. And so who she owed money to now was coming to take her children as slaves, because that was the only thing she had as collateral. That is a bad situation, folks. If we can prevent that, we should. If there's nothing that can be done, maybe nothing can be done, but how did the debt accrue? We don't know. In Nehemiah chapter 5, this was after the children of Israel were coming back from Babylon to rebuild the walls of the city, to rebuild the temple under Nehemiah and Ezra, whatever. And in chapter 5, we have another account. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, "We and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain." Others were saying, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine." Still others were saying, "We have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we're powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others." Whoa! How many of our houses belong to others? How many of our cars belong to others? How many of our other stuff belongs to others? See, if we can keep the ball spinning, all is well, but if something happens and the ball stops spinning, we got problems. One more account, and that's from Jesus himself in Matthew 18. Remember the parable where Jesus, I think I preached on here recently, of the king calling one servant who owed him a great debt and said, "Pay up or else," and the guy fell down and said, "Oh, have mercy on me, I'll pay." The king said, "I'll tell you what, I forgive it." So this guy went out, and here's the account of that. When that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, nothing. He grabbed him and began to choke him. "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, "Be patient with me and I will pay you back." But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay his debt. Jesus did not think highly of that, as we see the rest of that. But capture some truth here. In America, due to benevolent laws and government protection, due to those laws, slavery is illegal, as are debtors' prisons. But in the rest of the world, these protections may not be in place at all. But the principle still applies. My grandparents owned a farm in Kansas, I believe, a part of our family folklore, and they owned it free and clear, as I understand the story. They lived far from town, so they wanted to move to town. They borrowed a pittance, a few dollars, to build a little house in town so the kids could go to school. But the Dust Bowl came, the Depression came, all of a sudden the farm produced nothing. But because they had borrowed a few dollars to build their little house, they lost everything. See, I mean, this kind of stuff happens. Now, had they not been in debt, they could have weathered it one way or the other, likely, and whatever else would have happened, you know, when the rain came and the crops came back, well, they would have had the farm. How about today there's another situation. Just refuse or get yourself into a situation where you're unable to pay your property taxes. There are whole industries, there are people all over America who scan every day the tax rolls to see somebody who's in default and then snap up the properties for pennies on the dollar just for taxes. Now, I think the property tax thing is a bad deal in a lot of ways because I think in a large measure it nullifies the concept of private property. But be that as it may, that's the world we live in. There are degrees of bondage depending on a lot of circumstances. Some of them actually are beyond our control. You know, you get taken captive, well, you're taken captive. That's how life is. But likely every person here, my suspicion is, probably every one of us, can attest to the truth of the fact that if we have borrowed money, we have become a servant to whoever we borrowed the money from. I mean, come on. You know, I'm a servant yet to the bank. Right? If I don't pay up, they come and get it. They come and get it. If we do not make our payments, we're homeless. All the equity, all the years we've paid absolutely means nothing, not a zero, zipperoo. If we don't make our payments, we're homeless. Well, how about for our houses, for our cars, for our toys, credit card, just stuff? See, if property values are increasing, going into debt for a house may seem wise. And honestly, I've wrestled with this. I don't know what to do with that, honestly, because this is where we live, this is how we live. I'm not sure what to do about the issue of a house, for example. Maybe the only way, it certainly in our culture is the major way anyone can buy a house today. But as it has happened in my lifetime multiple times, I have seen people who have lost everything because they owed the bank or whatever. In fact, I have seen the situation happen multiple times where people actually had to pay other people to take their house in order to get out from under the debt of their house because they were upside down. For example, they paid $100,000 for the house, stuff happened, now their house was worth $50,000, and they either had to keep making payments on $100,000, which they didn't have, or they had to pay somebody else to take their house. I mean, I've seen that happen. So the principle is true regardless. Some people beat the system from time to time. Many don't beat the system from time to time. But the system itself is that the borrower is the servant to the lender. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is the servant to the lender. And we now then are not free. We're to that degree, we're in bondage. There are degrees of bondage, to be sure. But if we borrow for stuff that is decreasing in value automatically, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but I know that in America, a high proportion of people, I would say probably the vast majority of people in America, owe more on their vehicle than it's worth. I mean, the new vehicle looks good, it has all the bells and whistles, blah, blah, blah. The interest rate is low, you know, it's only $20,000. But the minute you drive it off the lot, it's worth $15,000. Yeah. Boy, if you're lucky. Yeah. And it gets worth less and less and less every day. You can't keep up. And so, we're in bondage to this stuff, and credit cards are even worse than that. And it's crazy. But the biblical principle is that the borrower is servant to the lender and becomes a slave in that regard. As I say, not all debt is equal, but all debt brings a modicum or a degree of servitude. Now, one method, and this is just an aside, one method of dealing with somewhat non-crippling debt, and there can be debt that is not crippling, at least temporarily, is that if the item that we're purchasing has greater value than what we owe, and if it is the surety for itself, you with me? Then the risk is that we would lose this item that we bought. But the problem is, in our country today, very few things are that way. If you buy a car for $20,000 and something happens and you got to get rid of it, you still owe the $20,000. And if you can only get $10,000 for the stupid car, you still owe, you lose the car, and you still owe the $10,000. And increasingly the same is true, I believe, of mortgages. You know, some of the mortgages are just on the property itself. If you can't make the payments, you lose the property. Others, you're in debt the rest of your life, having to pay for a dead horse. This business of debt is probably in our country the greatest source of voluntary servitude that can become involuntary servitude. By all means, the best and safest way to live is debt-free. I think that we should all strive for that end, and we should be very diligent. Why? Because the scripture says, do not become the slaves of men. Well, if we do, that's on us, right? We get the gadget that we want now. Yeah. You know, we get the hamburger today for which I will gladly repay you on Tuesday, you know. But when Tuesday comes and we can't make the payment, then we have ourselves in a bind. Now, forced slavery is still possible. We may be able to do nothing about that. But man, if we are in debt, we should by all means try to gain our freedom, and then don't become again entangled in bondage. That is a crucial principle. It works whether you live here or Afghanistan or wherever you live. It just maybe works in a little different fashion depending on the culture in which we live, but it's still true. Now, there should be a Roman numeral 4 on your page, and this is operator error. Mine, I had it, but I just didn't get it in the notes. But there's another principle, and that is this. Whatever our lot in life is, do it well. Young people, old people, whoever we are, folks, this is a principle. I am absolutely convinced that in this world today, if anybody will do a better job than is asked, the world itself will make a way for that person. Do it well. The scripture that I read partially, but let me read it again. Even if you are a slave, fill in the blank with whatever that means to you. If you start out cleaning toilets, you know, whatever our task is, okay? Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to win their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Ephesians 6 re-emphasizes that, starting in verse 5. Let me just read it. It's similar, but a little different. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not men, because you know that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So, folks, whatever your role is, are you a housewife? Well, don't do what you do just because of the idiot you married. You know, do it to the Lord. Do it for the Lord. You know, you mechanic, don't just be working for the crotchety person that brought in their car and is in your face. Fix the car as though it belongs to Jesus. You know, if you're a builder, don't just slop through and cut corners, you know, but do it well because you're doing it for the Lord, not just for the homeowner that is a dingbat. This whole concept, whether I'm for a salesman, don't just be selling to get a paycheck, right? The heathen do that. That makes money, Lord. But do what you're doing for the Lord, so that you're looking out for your boss's interest, but you're also looking out for your customer's interest honestly. You're not just trying to make a fast buck, but you're doing it as unto the Lord. What a radical difference. But again, I believe that God will make a way for people who will do whatever they do as to the Lord. What a radical... In the world today, very few people understand that. I think very few people raised in church understand that. But man, what a profound truth. It's an attitude. Who are we living for and why? Serve one another. Serve God with that sincerity of heart. Look out for the needs of others. Folks, I have seen people my whole life. In fact, I've probably been one from time to time, and I have to fight it now to just look out for me. But God tells us, look out for the other person. If we will look out for the other person and be faithful with that which belongs to others, then we can be trusted with our own. But if we are forever grasping at the pennies, I have known people, men, they are so stinking tight and miserable and such misers and whatever, that they don't like themselves. Nothing is ever good. They are miserable in their own skin, and everybody around them, they're miserable too. And then there are other people who have the heart of serving, the heart of giving, the heart of contributing, the heart of making a difference positively in other people's lives, and people want to be around them. And even in business it pays, though it may not pay in the short term. We had a situation where we had a pharmacist, and the pharmacist, whether he really was looking out for me or not, I don't know, but I would be looking at, he said, you know, if you do it this way, it's a lot cheaper. You can do it this way. You know, you can actually pay for that yourself, and it will cost you less than the copay of insurance. Now, he could have made a wad by the insurance paying a wad, and me just, you know, but I felt like he was looking out for us. I went to the same, now, he went away, and we got a new pharmacist. This guy charged $40 for a set of pills that would have been maybe $3 or $4. And we actually went somewhere else to get those pills, ultimately. But here, you know, this guy, he got us once. He got us once. But he got us once. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so now as believers, the counteraction to that is right here in Scripture. Look out for the needs of others and do whatever you do as though you're doing it for the Lord. Man, how many problems are solved in that way. So, some biblical principles today. Bloom where you're planted. Wherever you are, God is not taken by surprise. He knows where you are. He knows who you are. He knows how old you are. He knows your physical limitations, your mental limitations, your whatever limitations. He knows your financial limitations. So if we will just concentrate on coming to Jesus where we are and blooming for the glory of God where we are, because this is the only way we can. We can't serve God where we wish we were. But we can serve God where we are, and man, that can take a lot of pressure off. The second part of that is we need to learn to be content. What a peace of mind happens when we cross that threshold, and we may have to learn it every day, but rather than to be unhappy with every stinking thing in our world, why not say, wait a momento here, and learn to be content. If nothing else, it changes us. But I'm convinced that it also changes the world around us dramatically, because I believe there's something in that process that gives God the right to free us and do different stuff for us. Ponder it. Third, let's not become the slaves of men. If we already are slaves, as many, maybe most of us are, let's try to gain our freedom. Let's gain our freedom. But where we are is where we are. Let's not become slaves of men on purpose. You with me? And debt is the likeliest form of voluntary servitude. And finally, whatever we do, let's do it well. And I believe that I really do believe that God wants to prosper His people, not, let me repeat, not in the way of the health and wealth gospel. That is bogus. And it's devastating. It's just not true. But I do believe God wants to bless His people, and He wants to bless His people so His people can bless others, and so we can be the salt and the light. If we were free, man, our overhead would drop dramatically, right? If we were debt-free, for example, we could probably get by on a half or a quarter of our income, depending on who we are. You with me? So let's not become servants of men willingly.
Thank you for watching. For questions on today's video, please reach out to us at www.flatheadekklesia.org.